Yes, this is perfect. This would be the perfect film for my next campaign. Now, how should I start it? Yes, all reliable. The tavern meetup. Stop! I don't do a tavern meetup. I'm a wizard from your campaign, and everything goes wrong. We lose. The economy crashes. No one can afford houses. Brown cows stop making chocolate milk. The moon isn't a cheese anymore. It's a big rock. Nothing makes sense. We used up all of our magic to send me here to warn you. Please don't do a tavern meetup again. I don't have much more time, but... Okay, that was weird. Howdy guys. We all know how important it is to start any good story or campaign with a nice strong hook, as this will set the tone for the rest of the campaign moving forward. So in this video, I'm going to tell you my 4 favorite ways to start a campaign along with some examples of them, their strengths, their weaknesses, and my tips for using them. These 4 starts being a congregation point, an event, a debriefing room, or in media res. And on screen, you can find a few questions to ask yourself to help determine which start might be best for you. Without further ado, go ahead and grab your L and let's jump into this. First, we have our congregation point. Now, what does this mean exactly? A congregation point is any physical location that your party might logically gather in or run into each other naturally, and a place where they can receive their call to action. An example of a congregation point is the classic, a tavern, or a marketplace, town square, a library, places like that. Or another way to think about this is it's any logical place that you might have hung out with friends, either during your school days or as an adult. Like, where do you go to make friends and meet people? That's a congregation point, most likely. All you have to do is take that place and tweak it a little bit, add a little bit of fantasy elements or whatever setting your campaign is taking place in. So what are the benefits of using a congregation point as your campaign start? The first one is it's super easy. It's a common trope that we're all familiar with. A band of random heroes gather up in a tavern and they all meet for the first time and the quest giver comes in and sends them on their way. Easy. On top of that, this start gives our players a lot of agency on how they want to navigate through your story because they can either choose to accept the quest that your quest giver gave or potentially choose another one. It also helps make the story make a lot of sense for why there's this group of weirdos all gathered together doing this task. And if that's not enough, this story start encourages a lot of roleplay opportunities with your characters as they get to introduce themselves and interact with one another, especially if they have intertwined backstories. Now, as for the weaknesses of this start, it's a trope and it's been overdone so often. So some players might be burned out of using this start every single time, depending on how often they've played in either D&D or other TTRPGs, or even just in video games. This start also doesn't make a lot of sense if your party is higher level and has some level of established history with one another. So that can be a little difficult with your story, but it can be shrugged off. As for my biggest tip for utilizing this start for a campaign, I think it's highly beneficial if you use this if you plan to have a hub world of sorts, or a one major town or area of a town that your party's going to be coming back to over and over again, as this will help establish this location as important for the rest of the campaign and solidify it in your party's mind. It also allows you to really build up a little bit more lore about this location and this town very easily. And as your party gets higher level and continues to stack on feats of strength, well, their renown and fame will really start to spread throughout this town and they'll truly feel like the heroes they want to be. Along with that, this makes it super easy for them to meet future quest NPCs all in one central location without having to sprinkle them out throughout the world randomly. And now, let's move on to our second campaign start, events. An event start to a campaign is just as straightforward as it sounds. This is any event your party might be invited to or is playing an active role in where the call to action takes place. Now, I understand that event starts sound very similar to the congregation point start, but there are 2 key differences. The first difference being that the location isn't necessarily just one building. It can be a whole section of the town or the whole town altogether, depending on what the event is. Or it could be something super secluded and niche, like a secret cultist meeting or some other type of secluded venue. With the second key difference being that the call to action doesn't happen to your party specifically, but instead happens generally. This puts a lot of weight on your party to be able to recognize the triggering event and be able to step up to the occasion. As for examples of event starts, well, this is just as straightforward as congregation point. It's literally any event that you might attend in real life, but with a dash of fantasy added to it. A royal wedding, a funeral, the naming ceremony of the next king and queen. Hell, it could just be something as simple as them participating in a protest, a riot, or witnessing some type of criminal activity. It could be almost anything, really. To me, one of the biggest strengths, though, of using this type of start is that it's so convenient and easy for us GMs to use it in any campaign we want. Not just that, it gives us GMs a great opportunity to just lore dump on our party. But that's not all. This gives our party a great opportunity to really explore and try out a bunch of different random things that might be present in our setting, as this gives us a great chance to really just highlight key things that are available. Some of these extra activities that they can experience are things like carnival games, participating in a tournament, pickpocketing people, or witnessing a pickpocketing situation happen, meeting with traveling merchants, and other things like that. And if that isn't enough for you, this start also gives our players a lot of player agency, as they have a lot of control over how they interact with this event and how their party really represents themselves. And for us GMs, this is a perfect opportunity to introduce a reoccurring NPC for our party that they can get future quest or aid from. In spite of how easy it is to really use an event start in your campaign, I think at the same time, it's a double-edged sword, as it can be really daunting at times to fully flesh out these events, because your party might ask a bunch of details or wander off to certain areas that you might not have prepared for. However, I think the biggest hurdle with the event starts is the call to action itself, mostly because the call to action doesn't happen to your party specifically, it happens around them. So if your party isn't able to pick up on the hints you're dropping, it can be a little frustrating as they constantly keep nudging them back in that same direction. Or in the worst case scenario, they ignore it outright and you have to think of something else altogether. Now, if you do plan to use this start, I have two major tips that will help make this a breeze and really overcome a lot of the weaknesses I just talked about. The first one being, if you plan to use this start, prepare for two additional scenarios. The first scenario being your party outright ignores the call to action or misses it altogether. And the second scenario being everything just goes horribly wrong. They get a bunch of bad rolls and everything crashes and burns around them. And maybe it's a completely different start altogether. Now, I don't think you need to fully flesh out these two scenarios, but have an idea of what you want to do in case those scenarios do occur. While the second major tip I have is give your party some type of role that they play actively in this event, like being security for the event or entertainment for the event. That way, they know what they're doing and don't feel so overwhelmed about where they're supposed to be going or focusing their attention on. And this helps make your call to action a lot more obvious for them, so they have no chance of missing it. But that's it for events. Now let's move on to debriefing rooms. I like to think of debriefing room starts to campaigns pretty much like a congregation point start turned all the way up to 11 though. Because instead of the players being in the right place at the right time by sheer luck, they were chosen or summoned for this mission specifically. So there is no dispute that these are in fact the droids we are looking for. Now, when it comes to examples of debriefing rooms, stick to the classics. The King's Reception Chamber, the General's Tent, a council meeting, the Wizard's Secret Lab, or it can be something as simple as someone's living room. It can be anywhere really, so long as the only people in this room play some level of role into the call of action. If they don't, they shouldn't be here. But now, let's talk about the strengths. And I think this campaign start has one of the biggest and best strengths out of all the 4 starts. With that strength being, you don't have to worry whatsoever about your party not accepting the mission or being confused about what the mission is, because they were already chosen, volunteered, or promised whatever reward they needed to accept this mission and sign that contract. And if that's not good enough for you, there are other major bonuses to utilizing this campaign start. One of them being that you just jump straight into the story. There's minimal fluff. You just get in, you know exactly what you're doing, and you go. And it works as a perfect catalyst to help spark potential roleplay opportunities between your party members, as the reward each player asks for can hint at elements of their backstory or what their true desires are. And if you still want more strengths to the start, well, it gives your party another reoccurring NPC that they can utilize, or a few more, depending how the mission goes. But now we need to talk about the biggest weakness of the start. Well, weakness. This start can feel like you're railroading the party to do the story in a certain way or force them down a certain path. Otherwise meaning they have a little bit less player agency. But I don't know. I don't really see this as a problem because in my opinion, if your party wasn't going to accept the quest or there's no reward that can be offered to convince them to accept this quest, why are you sitting here? When you join a party for any TTRPG, it's implied that you want to participate actively in the story in some way or another, assuming everyone's having fun and respecting one another. The other major weakness to the start is that there isn't a lot of roleplay opportunities. So if your party wants to do a little bit more exploration and a little bit more fluff to introduce their characters, well, there's not too much of that in this start, as they're not given too much agency to wander around and interact with anyone that they want. But let's move on to my tips for how to use this start successfully. The biggest tip, my best advice, if you're going to use this start, is introduce your party members like they do in every heist movie. Give them that cool action scene and nickname. This is the driver. This is the mastermind, the muscle, the thief, and give each player a few minutes to describe themselves and how they kind of approach and walk up. Because this is a perfect opportunity to really let each player set the tone for how their character wants to be perceived. On top of that, this highlights what each character is really good at. It helps define what their role might be in this first mission. And for us GMs, this is a perfect opportunity to make sure that we have some type of skill check or event that really highlights each player character's skill set. But my biggest warning is don't pigeonhole your party into these roles for the rest of the story. Just this first mission. You don't want someone who's the thief or the mastermind or the muscle to always feel like they have to be that person. And if you need some ideas of rewards to offer your party, try some of these. Try some of these. But without further ado, let's jump into our last start, in media res. Now, what does in media res starts really mean? It means you hit the ground running. You jump straight into the story. You have no context. You don't know who you are, where you are, what's going on. You just know you gotta go. You just do. And it assumes your party has already made major player choices, like accepting the quest, knowing each other, and choosing to work together. Or this means that the situation is unavoidable and it's gonna hit your party hard because, ready or not, we're starting the story. When it comes to examples for what an in media res start looks like, it can be a little bit hard to describe, but I'm going to do my best and describe to you at least 3 different flavors that you can utilize. So let's start with the first flavor and the simplest one that I can think of. A shared peril. This is some type of danger the whole party is experiencing together. This can either be a natural disaster like the town flooding or a wildfire out of control heading towards the town, or some type of just shared condition that they all have. Like being prisoners, being transported to be executed, like in Skyrim. Or, if you want a more modern example, think about how you start in Baldur's Gate 3. The whole party is captured by Illithid and are infected with their tadpoles, and you have to find a way off the ship. The next 2 flavors are very similar, but have one distinct difference. In the first one, the party has already accepted the mission itself. They are on the adventure that they're supposed to be on. Meaning, the campaign starts on day 5 of having tracked down the holy relic that was stolen by the cultists. And the party has already found the cultist hideout. They're getting ready to breach because with each passing day that the holy relic isn't returned to the temple, the curse is just spreading throughout the capital and your people are suffering. While the last flavor I'll be discussing is your party isn't on the adventure, they're on a mission that leads them to the adventure. Does that make sense? If not, here's how it could look. The first quest that the party has already accepted is something small or minor, like delivering supplies or guarding a caravan from one settlement to another, which then leads them to their main quest. Because as they arrive to the town, they find out that it's been decimated or infected with some type of disease, and now they're tasked or encouraged to discover the cause or the reason behind this town being destroyed or infected. That's the mission, while the mission they accepted was a simple guarding or delivering of supplies. As for the strengths of this campaign start, they're very similar to Debriefing Room. You jump straight into the story, no fluff, no nonsense, no concern about your party not accepting the call to action. It's happened already. Things are moving and they know what their purpose is. I personally think this start is also best suited for one-shots or shorter campaigns, as it helps cut out a lot of the intro fluff and travel portion to get to the main mission. This is also a great start for parties that have already played together for a while, so they already kind of know each other's playstyle. Or if their backstories are all already intertwined with one another and they don't need to introduce themselves to work together. Plus, depending on what flavor of media res start you choose to use in your campaign, there are many bonuses that come along with that. Some of them being reoccurring NPCs, major boons or favors your party might earn that they can cash in later, or just increased player agency. As for the weaknesses of in media res starts, these are pretty straightforward. The first and biggest weakness of in media res starts is the exact same as a debriefing room starts. It has very little player agency at the very beginning. It assumes a lot of things already have been accepted. So some players might complain about this, but again, if they really don't want to accept any quests, if they really don't want to be playing your story, why are they here? But this is something that can be overcome by simply talking with your group and just kind of understanding what is it they want or are looking for in a story. What the last major weakness of this campaign start being, you as the GM need to make sure you are very prepared for this because there is a bunch of different things that can happen. With that said, it's a perfect segue into my biggest tips for this start. The biggest tip, prepare. These starts require the most amount of preparation, mostly because depending on which flavor you use, you give your player a very clear sense of deadline and urgency that you need to make sure that you can push them to that point immediately. Or in the worst case scenario, you need to know what's going to happen if they fail. Or if you're giving them some type of event that they need to investigate, you need to make sure you have all the clues necessary or extra clues in case they aren't understanding or picking up the first ones to help point them into where the mission really is. And if you're choosing to use a shared peril flavor, well, then you better have your improv game on point because in a state of disaster, you have no idea how your party is going to try to circumnavigate it. You need to kind of be ready for them to do anything and everything to survive that situation. And with that, that concludes my 4 favorite ways to start a campaign. If you found this video helpful and enjoyable, like this video and comment down below how you started your most recent campaign. Or if you haven't yet, how you plan to start your first campaign. While I find myself utilizing event and debriefing room starts the most, I love to read your ideas and see how you guys did it. And if you need tips and advice on how to make travel more engaging in your campaign, check out this video here. But yeah, see you guys next time. Stop!